The case shared today took place in Loudoun, Virginia, USA. This area is located in the northeastern part of Virginia. It is about 30 miles from the state capital, Richmond. It has a population of around 20,000 people. It is an unincorporated community within Caroline County. The protagonist, Lisa, was born in 1964 in New Jersey to a very wealthy family. Her father, Joseph, was a well-known local entrepreneur. He owned a chain of beauty salons and worked in the cosmetics industry. Thanks to her father, Lisa enjoyed a life of luxury. From a young age, she was cared for by two full-time nannies, lived in a spacious single-family villa, and drove the latest models of Rolls-Royce. Lisa enjoyed countless privileges in her early years, living a life that seemed like something out of a fairy tale. However, as the saying goes, life is full of uncertainties. Lisa's affluent lifestyle did not last forever. It began well but eventually declined. The main reason for this was she possessed a strong-willed nature. When Lisa was about 8 years old, her parents divorced for various reasons. Initially, this did not affect Lisa's life, but later on they had a daughter named Leah. At first, this couple was full of hope for the future, but when their daughter was diagnosed with an incurable congenital disease, they soon faced financial difficulties. Although Jim was a boss himself, his financial resources were insufficient to cover those expensive, long-term treatment costs. Under such economic pressure, Jim developed bad habits that ultimately led to the end of their marriage. After all that, Lisa finally grasped just how tough life could be. And in that moment she couldn't help but think of her wealthy father, the man she hadn't kept in touch with for years. For the sake of her sick daughter, Lisa set aside her pride and asked her father Joseph for help. In truth, Joseph never blamed Lisa. So when he learned about her situation, he immediately offered his support, agreeing to cover all of Leah's medical expenses and to continue providing unconditional financial assistance to Lisa. However, Lisa ultimately declined his offer because she wanted to rely on her own efforts rather than depend on her father's protection. Lisa planned to complete her college education first and then find a stable job too. She took on the role of a mother on her own. 5 years after her divorce in 1991, she moved with her daughter Leah to Richmond, Virginia. There, in November 1993, after 2 years together, they had a daughter named Shelby. 6 months later, in 1994, they got married and officially became legal spouses. For Lisa, that year was undoubtedly one full of challenges. The main reason for this came down to financial struggles. Lisa had just graduated from college when she got married, and with 2 young children at home, she simply couldn't go out and work. Her husband, Lawrence, had very limited earning capacity, making it difficult for the couple to cover the expenses of their family of 4. As a result, their life after marriage was very difficult, and they often argued due to lack of money. Seeing that their marriage was on the verge of breaking down in the end, Lisa had no other choice but to send their eldest daughter away. Leah moved to her mother's place at the end of 1994. Then she resolutely joined the US Army and became a soldier. There were mainly 2 reasons why Lisa made this decision. One was that she hoped to. One reason was to repair her relationship with Lawrence by temporarily leaving him. The other was that Lawrence's ability to earn money was so poor that Lisa wanted to find a stable job. She left her daughter Shelby with a nanny and packed her luggage in the afternoon. Once everything was ready, around 6 p.m., Lawrence took Lisa to the bus station in Richmond, since Lisa was going to take. He took a bus to the officer training school in Lebo City. After that, the 2 parted ways and never had any further contact. Lawrence also provided the police with some information, such as details regarding his financial difficulties, the challenges their family was facing, along with Lisa's previous romantic relationship. In general, Lawrence wasn't too worried about Lisa's disappearance, because she had left her husband in much the same way that many years before. Therefore, he thought that Lisa might have deliberately left home in order to get away from Ted's heavy debts and start a new life. The police verified Lawrence's after taking their statements and contacting Lisa's parents, Both of them said that it was possible Lisa had run away. The reasons they gave were very similar to Lawrence's. Nevertheless, the police did not rush to draw a conclusion. They then went to Lisa and Lawrence's home and were surprised to find a young tenant living there. The tenant, who gave the alias Anna, was actually just a 14-year-old girl. After speaking with her, the police asked about what had been going on at the house lately. However, according to Anna, not long after that, they received a phone call from Lisa's parents. This time, the authorities changed their previous stance. They now believed that Lisa's disappearance was not a case of running away, but rather an accident. First, Lisa had not contacted her. She hadn't seen her family or visited her sick daughter, Leah, in the past month, a pattern that had never happened before. Second, Lawrence quickly changed his phone number right after the incident and was no longer. They were willing to share it. The custody of Shelby also raised suspicions among Lisa's parents. For these reasons, they asked the police to reinvestigate the case, especially focusing on. Initially, they focused on Lisa, husband, Lawrence, and her ex-husband, Jim. The police did take action. I immediately went to Lawrence's residence, but it was already too late. As for Lisa's ex-husband, Jim had left Virginia, and no one knew where she had gone. Initially, Lisa's husband, Lawrence, agreed to cooperate and consented to the police. They made a request for him to lie about the situation. However, when it finally came time to do so, Lawrence used the excuse of being ill to refuse. After more than a month of back and forth, Lawrence secretly took their daughter Shelby and left Carroll County one night. The commotion caused by this change allowed them to gain access. More resources and funding were allocated for the investigation, which proved absolutely crucial to solving the case. The first step was for the police to carefully review all the case files from that year. There weren't too many files to begin with, only the statement Lawrence had made when reporting the incident. However, this statement contained several suspicious details. For example, Lawrence claimed that Lisa had left their daughter Shelby with a nanny before she disappeared. However, he never mentioned what happened to that nanny, which is highly suspicious. Additionally, Lawrence mentioned a bus station in Leesburg. He claimed that Lisa had planned to take a bus from there, heading to Libby, where the military academy was located, but in reality, there were no bus routes from Leesburg to Libby at that time. This means it was impossible for Lisa to have taken a bus away, which further indicates that Lawrence had not told the truth. Based on these findings, the police became even more convinced that Lawrence was a suspect in the case. However, finding him was not easy, as he had completely disappeared from public view. There were no bank transactions, and he had no contact with family or friends, leaving the police with no clues to start with. Lawrence, it wasn't that they were identical, and they both applied for custody of their child together, making it seem as if they were accomplices. However, finding Jim was also difficult, as he had disappeared without a trace since the incident. After several more months of investigation, the police finally located Jim in a homeless shelter in Florida. To their surprise, Jim was not only not an accomplice, but also a key witness with crucial information. It all started with a phone call before the incident. According to Jim, Lawrence told him about Lisa's disappearance on the 27th of January. He claimed to have taken her to the bus station that evening. Lawrence called Jim and said that Lisa had abandoned her family and children, and that he wanted to join forces with Jim to take revenge on her by applying for custody of their children together. Since Jim and Lawrence had no previous interactions, this call raised Jim's suspicions. He assumed that something bad what had happened to Lisa, and to avoid getting involved, I recorded the conversation on a tape recorder. Jim moved into Lawrence's residence so we could discuss their child's custody together. During this period, to prove he had nothing to do with Lisa's disappearance, Jim secretly used a recorder to capture numerous conversations, and among those recordings, in the official report, Lawrence stated that the 27th of January was the day he took Lisa to the bus station. This inconsistency proved that Lawrence was involved in the case. Both the report and the The recorded tapes became key evidence for the police. However, the investigation was far from over. Since the police still needed to uncover Lawrence's motive and locate Lisa's body, they interviewed many potential witnesses, including Anna, the tenant who had been living in Lawrence and Lisa's house at the time. When the incident occurred, Anna was only 14 years old. But now she is an adult, both mentally and emotionally mature. After receiving certain assurances from the police, Anna quickly admitted that she had not told the truth. In fact, she had seen the scene of the crime. According to Anna, that night, while she was resting in her bedroom, she suddenly heard noises coming from the second floor, shortly after Lawrence left the house. Carrying a heavy suitcase, feeling suspicious, Anna went upstairs and found a gruesome scene. Blood everywhere in the bathroom and hallway. Terrified, she quickly returned to her bedroom and kept silent about what she had seen. The police verified Anna's account and visited the former residence of Lawrence and Lisa. Despite the many years that had passed, they poured acid over it. He shut his door and returned to the residence as if nothing had happened. Of course, this was just Lawrence's version of the events. The police did not believe it, especially regarding They determined that Lisa's death was not an accident. Based on the clues they had gathered, she had actually mentioned to her nanny 2 days before the incident that she intended to file for divorce. Lawrence wasn't very good at making money, and he was quite controlling. Moreover, he had overheard their conversation, which led the police to believe that he might have. He killed Lisa to prevent the divorce. Nevertheless, the police eventually reached a plea deal with Lawrence. At that time, all they had was indirect evidence, and the body of Lisa was never found. Although the existing evidence was still sufficient to prosecute Lawrence, it remained uncertain who would ultimately benefit. Therefore, after careful consideration, he made his decision. The police chose a more cautious approach, reaching a plea deal with Lawrence. As for the whereabouts of Lisa's body, Lawrence claimed to have no clear memory of it, and did not disclose any details. The information at the time, it was released in May 2009, 14 years after the crime occurred.